In the beginning, man believed flight to be the privilege of mythological gods. The gods of Crete, of Egypt, of Assyria, and of Greece. As man's capabilities developed, so developed his power to dream of his own ability to fly. Leonardo da Vinci, whose genius stands in marked contrast to the ideas of his contemporaries. If it were not for the dreams in his fertile mind and the dreams in the minds of generations that followed, there would have been no tomorrow. Throughout history, throughout the world, the achievement of sustained, controlled, and powered flight eluded man. The dream was there, but never fulfilled. Sir George Cayley, with his revolutionary wing designs, solved the problems of lift. Steam and clockwork planes followed in 1857. Mosaiski's 1884 steam plane almost succeeded. Then, in 1903, the Wright brothers flew and created fresh dreams in the minds of the young. Throughout this century, the skies above Italy have been witness to many innovatory aeroplanes. As a nation, the Italians have long been noted for their flair in many areas of design, and it's natural that this flair should have produced much beauty in the field of aviation. From the brilliant concepts of Leonardo da Vinci to the aerodynamic lines of this Macchi 339 training aircraft, Italian designers have been constantly in the forefront of aviation technology. In the large consortiums that dominate today's industry, the names of the pioneers of Italian aviation survive. Names such as Macchi, Fiat, Savoia-Marchetti, Breda and Caproni. Gianni Caproni test flew his first aeroplane in May 1910. His daughter, Maria Feda Caproni, keeps this early airplane in the grounds of the Caproni Villa near Milan.
This is exactly the aeroplane of '99 that was constructed by my father in his house in a little village near Trento, Massone d'Arco. And he was helped by workmen of the same little village, and each piece is original. This aeroplane was always kept in the family, without any restoration. In Arco, they had no places to run the aeroplane. So he decided to carry the aeroplane on the train. They arrived in Malpensa. Malpensa was used in this epoch for maneuver with the horses. And he had a few time to put the aeroplane together, and then they had to try the engine. And the mechanical, Ugo Tabacchi, went on the aeroplane and tried the engine. And after 70 meters, he was in the air. And then he was crying, "How can I come down?" And my father, with his daughter Fraschini, hurry up and say, "Oh, you must move this, do so and so." And he crashed, of course.
At this time, aviation around the world was very much in its infancy, and Italy was no exception. Progress was achieved by imaginative and often dangerous experimentation. Manufacturing owed more to cabinet making than today's high-tech approach. There were few accepted rules or practices. Everything was open to debate. Nevertheless, pioneers were emerging at this time who were to have a far-reaching influence on the development of the airplane in Italy. Pilots such as Savoia, famous for his legendary line of flying boats, in collaboration with Alessandro Macchi. In 1911, the Libyan War was to bring the airplane into military action for the first time in its history. Flying a Blériot monoplane on the 21st of October, a Captain Piazza took off from Tripoli to fly a reconnaissance mission over the enemy lines. A volunteer force of pioneer pilots flew out to join the campaign. Their successes led, on their return to Italy, to the formation of the Aviators Battalion, the forerunner of the modern Italian Air Force. The aeroplane's brief age of innocence was nearing its end, and in the last years of the Belle Époque, aviators around the world began to turn their attention to the potential of the aeroplane as a fighting machine. At the outbreak of the First World War, the man in command of Italy's Aviators Battalion was Colonel Giulio Due. From his experiences as a pilot during the campaign in Libya, Due had begun to develop a theory of tactical bombing. Along with pioneers such as Gianni Caproni, Due advocated the establishment of a force of bombing aircraft that would be capable of attacking strategic targets and cutting off the enemy's lines of supply and communication. Flying Caproni's specially designed biplane bombers, they were able to carry out missions far into the Austrian Alps and supported the ground troops in such actions as the battle for Pergine. The airship also enjoyed an increase in production and development in Italy during the war years. The exploits of the Aviators Battalion had a use beyond the military. Attacks such as the raid on the Kota Naval Base were well publicized. This did much to strengthen the morale of the Italian people at a time when casualties in the grim land battles were particularly severe. Their successes also supported the conviction of Caproni, Due, and others that the airplane would have an essential role to play in any future conflict. By the time of the armistice, the intensity of wartime aircraft production had led many of the pioneers in Italy to establish themselves as companies. With the coming of peace, Caproni, Fiat, Ansaldo, Macchi, and others would be faced with the sudden cancellation of military orders. However, peace would also bring new and different challenges. In February of 1919, it was decided to hold an air race from Rome to Tokyo. Several competitors in the race chose to fly the Ansaldo SVA-5, which had been designed during the war years as a fighting machine, but which now found a new peacetime role, pushing back the frontiers of long-distance flight. Flying via staging posts in Iraq, India, Tibet, and China, two of the Ansaldos completed the race, a distance of some 11,250 miles in 109 flying hours. The era of the great air races had begun. The Italian airship also enjoyed a peacetime role in exploring the new frontiers of aviation. The Norgay was designed by Umberto Nobile in 1923, at which time he was director of the military factory for aeronautical construction. In May 1926, the Norgay was to make the first transpolar flight in aviation history. Gianni Caproni's CA-3 biplane and CA-4 triplane bombers had been the mainstay of the revolutionary bombing strategies of the Air Force during the war. Now, Caproni turned his attention to the development of a large-scale passenger aircraft.
He was very interested in civil aircraft, and he was constructing in 1921, and it flew twice, an aeroplane for 100 people. This aeroplane was a dream that he always took back, to have a lot of people flying in the sky.
The Caproni 60 was dubbed Capronissimo. In recognition of its extraordinary size, it was a giant aeroplane by any standards.
6 engine, 9 wings. It was immense, huge, and it crashed the 3 of March of 1921.
More successful was the Caproni 73 bomber. Designed in 1924, it was chosen to equip the Regia Aeronautica, the new Italian Air Force created by Mussolini in the previous year. Along with the Ansaldo SVA series, the Caproni bombers would continue to be the mainstay of the Regia Aeronautica for much of the period between the wars. Mussolini had created the Regia Aeronautica with the intention of building up Italy's air power, and so began a steady increase in design and production to provide the new aircraft that were needed. Production facilities were improved and enlarged, and manufacturing techniques modernized. The quality of available aero engines had always been a crucial factor in aircraft performance. With the improvement in lubricants and fuel and the appearance of new metal alloys, companies such as Fiat began producing a new generation of powerful and reliable power plants. Within a very few years, the Regia Aeronautica grew to one of the most prestigious air forces in the world. A central research establishment was founded to aid the progress of aviation technology. Named Guidonia in honor of the World War I flying ace Guidoni, the academy was to cover all aspects of the science of flight, from the theory of aerodynamics to the very practical problems of learning to fly. One of the prime movers of this massive reorganization was a man who was to be recognized as a pioneer aviator in his own right. His name, Italo Balbo. As a young officer, Balbo had attracted attention with his innovatory ideas and had risen rapidly to the position of Under Secretary of State for Aviation by 1928. 2 years later, he was to lead a squadron of Savoia-Marchetti flying boats in a long-distance flight to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, flying in strict formation all the way, the first time such a feat had been attempted. On his return from this adventure, Balbo immediately began planning an even more ambitious expedition. 1933 would be the year of the World's Fair in Chicago. It would also mark the 10th anniversary of the Regia Aeronautica. Balbo planned to lead 2 squadrons of flying boats, 24 aircraft in all, in close formation across the hazardous North Atlantic to visit the World's Fair to mark both occasions. Balbo's skills as an administrator ensured a meticulously planned operation. Mussolini gave his support to the plans, and by the 1st of July 1933, Balbo's air armada was ready to depart. The aeroplane that made this unique attempt possible was one of the most successful flying boats of all time, the Savoia-Marchetti S.55. Designed by Alessandro Marchetti, it first flew in 1925, and throughout a long and illustrious career, it acquired a legendary reputation for robustness and reliability. Crossing the Alps and flying a route that stayed as close as possible to lakes and other stretches of water, the Armada made its first call at Amsterdam. All the flying boats landed safely on the Zuider Zee, but then disaster struck when one aircraft overturned in shallow water, killing a mechanic. Despite this early setback, the Armada remained in good spirits, and the crowds in Holland flocked to catch a glimpse of this latter-day Columbus. The next port of call was to be Londonderry in Ireland. Here, Balbo was held up by reports of bad weather on the planned next stage of the journey, to Iceland. When the crews finally took off for Reykjavik, they found that weather conditions were little improved. However, they succeeded in reaching their port without loss. Bad weather continued to dog them as they crossed the North Atlantic, and frequent fog warnings were sent to the formation from the scout aircraft. Maintaining strict formation in thick fog while flying at 0 feet over a freezing sea strewn with icebergs was by any standards an extraordinary feat of airmanship. Balbo's persistence was finally rewarded when all 24 aircraft arrived safely over Lake Michigan, flying in impeccable formation, and were escorted to the World Fair by a galaxy of private and military aircraft and ships. For Balbo, the celebrations included lunch with the American president, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Having been feted in Chicago, the Armada flew on to New York, where the large population of Italians ensured an even more rapturous welcome for the flyers. Balbo's Armada had completed the Atlantic crossing in 48 hours flying time, flying a total of 6,065 miles in close formation. The Armada assembled at Shoal Harbor, Newfoundland, to begin the homeward journey. They were once more held up by the Atlantic weather. Balbo had originally planned to return via Ireland and to visit the French Air Force, who had invited the Armada to make a stop in France. Now, the persistence of the Atlantic storms led him to choose a more southerly route, taking in the Azores. Even so, it was not until the 8th of August that all was ready for the departure. The return was marred by tragedy when one of the aircraft crashed on takeoff from San Miguel Island, killing its crew. The remainder of the Armada reached Lisbon in Portugal that evening in somber mood. Nothing, however, would have prevented the ecstatic reception that awaited Balbo and his crews when they arrived at Ostia, the ancient port of Rome. Balbo, as ambassador of the 10-year-old Regia Aeronautica, had led the Air Armada in a feat of flying which few other air forces in the world at that time could have accomplished. He had put Italy's air force firmly on the international stage. After a triumphal march through the streets of Rome, Balbo was made the first Marshal of the Italian Air Force. But it was not only in the field of long-distance flight that Italian design was to lead the world. The Schneider Trophy, symbol of a rivalry between Italian, British and American designers that produced some of the most outstanding aeroplanes ever flown. Initiated by Jacques Schneider in 1913, the Schneider Trophy would be awarded to the winner in an annual contest open to hydroplanes of all nations. In 1919, a series of advanced Italian aircraft were entered. In 1920 and 1921, the Italian teams triumphed. In 1927, the Italian entry was the sleek Macchi M39 monoplane, a design that looked forward to the aircraft of the next decade. The Americans answered this with the Curtiss R3C2, a development of the airplane that Jimmy Doolittle had flown to victory in the previous year's contest. The Italian team had good reason to feel confident in the abilities of the Macchi machines. The three pilots, Mario De Bernardi, the team captain, Arturo Ferrarini, and Adriano Bacula, were flying one of the most advanced aeroplanes in the world. The British planes were not ready in time for the contest, and so the 1926 Schneider race became a duel between the Italians and the Americans. This duel was not without incident. Towards the end of the 7-lap race, the 800 horsepower Fiat engine in Mario De Bernardi's Macchi began to overheat drastically, and he and the American George Cudahy were racing neck and neck on the final lap when the Curtiss suffered an engine failure, and Bernardi went on to take the trophy with an average speed of 246.3 miles per hour. As winners, Italy hosted the next challenge in 1927 at Venice. Macchi's experience with the M39 led to the development of a new challenger, the Macchi M52. Powered by a new engine, the powerful 1,000 horsepower Fiat AS3, the aeroplane promised much. Unfortunately, teething troubles with the engine were to mar Italy's attempt to retain the trophy. As always, the Schneider competitions attracted observers and aviators from all over the world. In the interwar years, they provided a valuable opportunity for pioneers of all nations to meet and to exchange ideas and experiences. The Aero Club d'Italia had redesigned the course this year around a circuit of 27 nautical miles, which allowed the competing aircraft to cross the start line in the air for the first time. It was to be Macchi's arch-rival, Supermarine, who were to shine at Venice. The S5, another in the line of designs by Reginald Mitchell, showed its kinship with the Italian Macchi in its sleek lines. Powered by an 875 horsepower Rolls-Royce engine, the S5 completed the course with an average speed of 281.65 miles per hour, a new world record for both land and seaplanes. During the contest, the crowds watched with dismay as the brilliant red Macchis were forced to retire one by one with engine problems. However, these problems were quickly corrected, and in November of 1927, Mario de Bernardi demonstrated the Macchi 52's potential by flying it to a new world speed record of 299 miles per hour. It was decided to postpone the next challenge for 2 years to allow time for the teams to develop new aircraft. And so it was that the Isle of Wight, in the United Kingdom, hosted the next race in 1929. This year saw the Macchi 52s and the new Macchi M67 competing against the Supermarine S6. Again, engine problems plagued both teams, and the British planes needed an emergency engine replacement the night before the race. However, the Supermarines once again took the trophy. Flying Officer Waghorn completing the course with an average speed of 328 miles per hour. For the contest of 1931, Macchi worked feverishly to make ready a revolutionary new aircraft. The Macchi 72 was powered by 2 engines working in tandem and driving 2 contra-rotating propellers. This piece of innovative design solved several problems in one move. It enabled an increase in horsepower, whilst making the frontal area of the engine smaller, which allowed the use of smaller, tougher propeller blades. During its trials in Italy, the Macchi performed well, but the advanced design brought with it many new problems, and it was soon apparent that this worthy challenger to the S6B of Supermarine would not be ready in time for the race. But it was not the end of record-breaking for Macchi. In 1933, Francesco Agello flew the Macchi 72 to a top speed of 426 miles per hour, a new world record. The following year, Agello once again flew the Macchi to a new world record of 443 miles per hour, fully justifying the revolutionary design that had taken so long to realize its true potential. The pace of development did not diminish in the 30s. There were many new frontiers to be explored. On the 22nd of October 1938, Captain Mario Pezzi was helped into this cumbersome pressurized suit of armor in order to make an attempt to fly higher above the earth than any pilot had previously done. Sealed into his airplane and wearing an equally cumbersome helmet that was to supply him with vital oxygen, Captain Pezzi could operate the controls only with difficulty. Taking off into the sunny afternoon and watched anxiously by the crowd on the ground, Pezzi flew his aeroplane until it would climb no more. Circling ever higher and battling with frozen control lines, he reached a point where the engine could not develop any further power. He turned the aircraft earthward, having reached a record altitude of 56,046 feet. The machine in which Captain Pezzi broke the record was designed by Gianni Caproni. However, Caproni was not interested solely in the design of aeroplanes for sport.
My father looked at flight not for an emotion, a sportive emotion. He thought that flying must be useful for something. And so his really big problem was the defense of Italy. In each moment of his life, he was thinking that Italy has to be like Switzerland, in peace with everybody, but very strong strategically.
With Mussolini's Ethiopian campaign in 1935, the need for transport aircraft became acute. Conducting a campaign in such terrain made the use of road transport impracticable.
This Ethiopia war was extremely interesting because it is a logistical way to proceed, and it is the first and unique thing that Italy organized with German ideas.
It was to be Caproni aircraft that fulfilled the need for tactical support planes. The Caproni 101 had been designed in 1928 as a passenger or freight carrier. Its strong steel lattice construction made it extremely resilient, and it became the backbone of the Regia Aeronautica supply divisions. Some CA-101s were also adapted to carry out bombing missions in Mussolini's bid to subdue Emperor Haile Selassie. In Ethiopia, the Regia Aeronautica had operated without the threat of an opposing air force to contend with. With the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in July 1936, these same airmen were to gain their first experience of combat. In response to an appeal from the Spanish nationalist rebels, Mussolini ordered that a force of bombers and fighters be dispatched to Spain to support Franco's army. The initial flight of Savoia-81 bombers and Fiat CR-32 fighters had expanded within 6 months to 6 full squadrons. The numbers steadily increased until the fall of the Spanish Republic on the 28th of March, 1939. Mass production of military aircraft was now well established. The Regia Aeronautica was soon to need all the available resources of Italy's designers and manufacturers alike. In 1940, as a result of Mussolini's pact with Hitler, Italy entered the Second World War. Although faced with an aerial war on several fronts, the Italian air crews had experience on their side. The campaigns in Ethiopia and Spain had built a confidence in the abilities of their aircraft, and their combat techniques were well tested. North African campaign was to bring together 2 rivals from the pre-war years in a more deadly contest. The Macchi 202, descendant of the racing red floatplanes of the Schneider Trophy races. Over the desert sands, it was to meet with the ultimate challenge from the Supermarine design board, the Spitfire. The old rivalry was undiminished, but now the contest was to the death. The Macchis, always outstanding as racers, proved themselves no less efficient in their role as destroyers. The experiences of the Italian airmen who served on the Eastern Front were very different. The long and bitter struggle, exacerbated by the extreme cold of the Russian winter, threatened to have a crippling effect on men and machines alike. When the freezing conditions abated, and it was possible to fly the aircraft, these Macchi 200s were capable of outperforming the majority of the opposition that they met in the Russian skies. Nevertheless, the Regia Aeronautica was forced ultimately to withdraw for the first time in its history. Following the armistice with the Allies in September 1943, the few units of the Air Force that continued to fly alongside the German Luftwaffe found themselves increasingly short of essential supplies. The German squadron steadily withdrew northward, and the acute shortage of fuel and spares eventually made any further operations impossible. Little remained from the great years of the Regia Aeronautica. The challenge of rebuilding Italy in the aftermath of the war was a formidable one. No less formidable was the prospect faced by the aviation industry at this time. The future was uncertain for the designers of Italy, as the world moved into the jet age. Though the economics of the situation were bleak, the challenge of the new technology was to inspire rather than hinder Italian design. Gianni Caproni had been responsible for Italy's first experiment in jet propulsion in 1940. Together with Secondo Campini, he had developed the Campini-Caproni N1, an all-metal monoplane powered by a ducted fan jet engine. Despite the success of the first flight and subsequent trials, the Air Force showed little interest at the time in developing the aeroplane further. So it was that the skies of Italy in the late 1940s and the early 50s were dominated by jet aircraft of American design, such as the Republic F-84 Thunderjet. Supplied initially by the Americans under the terms of the post-war Mutual Defense Assistance Program, aircraft like the F-84 and its successor, the F-86 Super Sabre, were subsequently built in Italy under license by the Fiat company, who gained very valuable experience in the process. These Fairchild boxcar transports were also provided for under the terms of the American agreement. General Guido Due would surely have approved of their furtherance of the long tradition of tactical support flying, which he had begun in the Western Desert in 1911. While the Air Force was dominated by aircraft that had been conceived in Britain and the United States, designers at Fiat in Turin were working to develop a new jet aircraft in the Italian mold. The Fiat G91 had been prompted by a NATO requirement for a compact jet interceptor that could be produced in large numbers to equip the various air forces of the alliance. The career of this airplane was to be long and distinguished. Several versions are still in service today. With the G91, Italian design began to reassert itself in the skies. The intended mass purchase of the G91 did not take place, due to NATO decisions in the 1960s, which led to the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter being chosen by virtually every NATO air force. Serving alongside the Fiats, the F-104 was a controversial aeroplane, and early variants were not without their operational dangers. The aircraft that provided the basic training for the pilots of these frontline units of the Air Force was the Macchi 326. At Air Macchi's plant in Venegorno, work continued on its successor, the MB 339. The 339 is powered by a Rolls-Royce Viper engine. It is in some ways ironic that the latest in the illustrious line of Macchi designs should receive a power plant designed by the company who once powered the rivals of its racing ancestors. Designed to be adaptable to training and attack roles, the 339 has placed Air Macchi in the forefront of aviation technology. It is certainly a worthy heir to the glories of the Schneider racers. dream of many of Italy's pioneer aviators that the aeroplane's contribution to the world would be an entirely peaceful one. It was the dream of many more that if air forces were to be formed, the aeroplane would act as peacekeeper and not as aggressor.
The 339 has since been produced in a variety of formats, and the 208 production aircraft built have served not only the Italian Air Force, but the air forces of 8 other nations. Helicopter production in Italy has flourished in the 90s, and is set to continue well beyond the end of the century. The Augusta company had been manufacturing, under license, a variety of machines since the 50s. The latest of its international involvements being with the NH-90 program, a partnership of NH Industries, Eurocopter and Augusta, formed to produce a multi-role naval and tactical transport medium helicopter. But Augusta now has its own line of impressive helicopters designed solely in Italy. For the Italian Army, the A129 was first conceived back in the 70s, with 5 finally developed machines making their first series of flights throughout the 80s. Delivered in 1990, the A129 became the mainstay of the Italian Army's anti-tank capability. The A109, twin-turbine military and civil utility helicopter, produced in a variety of configurations to suit a wide range of roles. The military version is a multi-role, highly flexible machine, able to fulfill both attack and support roles. Its civilian brother is equally adaptable and appears in many variants. Also originally conceived and flown in the 70s, the A109 series of military and civil helicopters will also see service well beyond the year 2000. The latest in Italian rotary flight is the Koala A119 single turbine machine, which first flew in 1995 and immediately attracted orders for 20. With an expected production rate of 20 to 25 a year, the future looks bright for Augusta, not only with its military machines, but also by filling a place in the lucrative civilian market. Flight itself still grips the imagination and remains a thing of fascination and of beauty. No nation could have pursued its development more fervently or viewed it with more passion than the countrymen of the man who first conceived its true potential, Leonardo da Vinci.